so we will officially call the meeting to order, or our informational session to order. Good evening. My name is Ken Pavick. I'm the County Administrator. And we're here tonight to discuss a study that was done in partnership with DC EDC and several other communities. And for this evening, what we're hoping to accomplish is I'll have Steve Jenkins, the Executive Director of DC EDC, give us some context to the study. And then we're going to have our consultants who did the work for us do a presentation. Then we're hoping to take any questions from the public. And then from that standpoint, we'll hopefully do a little bit of wrap up in terms of what we first see in terms of next steps. So with that, I will turn the meeting over to the DC EDC Executive Director, Steve Jenkins. Steve?
Thanks, Ken. Just to kind of give you a historical context, in late 2020, we decided that the best approach for us to take was to do a comprehensive analysis about what we had in broadband, where the gaps were, and to develop a strategy to get to every house and every business in Door County, where feasible, fiber service. And fiber is the best way to future-proof a system, and Dean and Doug will, I'm sure, address that. So we put a RFP out in the early part of 2021 and went through a process of analyzing several submittals that were given to us by qualified broadband consultants from all over the nation. We looked at it on the business side as well as the technical side. Recommendation was made to hire Finley CCG as our consultant. The DC board executed that contract in April, and the report was finished in late October. And so you'll hear more about that from Dean and Doug. I do want to thank those who financially supported this very important study for our community, and that includes the County of Door, Town of Liberty Grove, Town of Sebastopol, Town of Bailey's Harbor, Town of Egg Harbor, Town of Brussels, Town of Jacksonport, the Washington Island Electric Cooperative, Town of Sturgeon Bay, Town of Clay Banks, the School District of Sturgeon Bay, and the Southern Door County School District. In addition, we had contributions from nonprofit and private sectors, including DCEDC, Renard's Cheese, Rosewood Dairy, Door County Medical Center, and the Ray Brook Foundation. So thanks to them for making this study possible. So, it's critical in terms of economic development, and we certainly are looking forward to an implementation of the recommendations that came out of the study. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dean Mitski and Doug Dawson from the consulting firm. And I think, Dean, are you going to handle the presentation, or is Doug?
I'm going to go first. He's going to run the slides.
Yeah, I'll run the slides. So if you want to give me presentation rights.
Do you have a green share screen button at the bottom, Dean?
Not yet.
Okay. I think Steve is the one that has to give it to you.
I think that's going to have to be Ken.
Okay.
Let me take a look once, 1 second.
And Dean just disappeared.
I'll get him back, 1 second.
Okay.
Dean, give it a try one more time. I don't think you were a panelist. I made you a panelist now.
There we go. All right, so let's just roll here. My name is Doug Dawson. I'm the president of CCG Consulting. You see our firm names down on the bottom. Dean is with Finley Engineering, and he will be doing the technical part of the presentation. And after I do a few slides, he will come on and talk about that. So let's go ahead and launch into it, Dean. So again, Steve's pretty much already said this. The purpose of this study was to understand the current broadband situation in the county, to understand where there were voids in service, and to look at options for improving broadband. And so this report, really, we wrote it for elected officials and the public. We tried to write it in plain English, but it's also got enough technical detail and backup to it that we think this is usable for the ISPs. This was certainly written with using the stuff in the study to go after grants and things to make all this work. So next slide. Your county has a mountain of ISPs, AT&T, CenturyLink, and Frontier are all the phone companies. AT&T announced in 2020 that they're no longer signing up new DSL customers. Charter is a cable company, and Sturgeon Bay, Jackson, Port, Egg Harbor, Fish Creek, FRM, Sister Bay, and Ellison Bay, and areas surrounding them. So it doesn't exactly follow the city boundaries. We also have wireless broadband by Door County Broadband, Mercury Networks, and SonicNet. We found a lot of people using satellite broadband. A lot of people were using cellular hotspots and even just using their cell phones for broadband. So a really wide array of how people are using broadband in the county. Next slide. So we reached out to the public to start this study off. And so we did it in several ways. First, we started with online surveys. Some of the folks here online hopefully would have taken those surveys. We had surveys for both residences and businesses. We also had online speed tests, and we interviewed key stakeholders throughout the county. Next slide. So what the survey showed us was some very interesting things. 17% of households say that they can't get broadband. That's a little bit of a deceptive number because 11% of those folks said they couldn't get broadband that was worth buying. So they had an option at their house, but for where they lived, it was so slow that they didn't want it. 6% said they actually couldn't get a signal at their house. Those are both very high numbers. And of course, those folks are out in the rural part of the county. 81% of the people that responded to the survey support building a fiber network in the county. Another 18% might support the idea. You add those up and you can see that's virtually everybody. Only 1% of people were against the idea of fiber. I don't know that we've ever seen one higher than that. So, and the original question that Steve had framed was, what's the state of broadband in the county? And quite honestly, it's fairly dreadful in a lot of the county. It's just some of the worst broadband we've seen around the country. 87% of survey respondents want faster speed. That's a really high number. 83% hope for competition and choice. That's a sort of another way of saying the same thing. 76 wanted reliability, and 60% hope for lower prices. Most places we study, prices come in first. People go, well, my broadband's okay, but sure would like it to be cheaper. But here it's clearly the actual quality of the broadband is the issue in the county. So 62% said they absolutely would buy broadband from a new fiber network. 23% said they would probably buy, and that's also two very high numbers. So, the whole purpose of doing these surveys was to help understand the demand in the county, and the demand is really high, and we just heard that from everybody we talked to as well. So, next slide. Business surveys are a little bit a different story because an awful lot of the businesses are in town and they're on charter, and so the businesses on charter. Mostly, and we interviewed a bunch of these, and we also had online surveys. And the ones served by charter basically all said they were okay with broadband. In fact, that's the word we kept hearing. But there were some issues with reliability. There were short outages fairly often, and upload speeds were a real problem. There were businesses who were having real trouble connecting to multiple people trying to work at home at the same time, and so upload speeds were a problem for some folks. Businesses outside of charter area just terribly struggle with broadband. The inns in the hotel don't have any broadband for their visitors. There were retail stores, the broadband is so bad, especially during season, that they can't get their credit cards to work. Every business that we interviewed said that they had a wish list of things they could do immediately better if they had better broadband. We also found that universally, including fiber customers. There are some fiber customers in the state or in the county, and everyone said that their broadband got slower during tourist season. I mean, there's so much demand when all the tourists show up that everybody's broadband slowed down. So those are all things that just picture a not very pretty situation. Next slide. The speed tests were interesting. We did our own speed tests. We also, the state's been doing speed tests here for a year or more. And so they had gathered a whole lot of speed tests in the county. We added ours into those, and I'll show you on the next slide. But and so they don't show a pretty picture on the slide. Again, in the cities, charter speeds are good. Everywhere else, charter averaged 67 megabits down. Everybody else altogether averaged 6 megabits down. So show the next slide, Dean. And this is the detail of all the speed tests. You can see there was a pretty large number of them. So, no individual speed test is 100% reliable because you never know that there's an odd situation at a customer's house. But when you take this many speed tests, they tell a really solid story. And so what this shows is Charter is the only one in the county who is meeting what the FCC considers to be broadband, which is 3 megabits down and 3 megabits up. None of the other ISPs are meeting that. Some of them are very far below that. And so, these speeds tell the story of why the people in the rural areas were very unhappy. On top of that, speed isn't everything because there's also latency issues and jitter issues, which are two technical terms to describe the quality of the signal when it shows up at your house. And so, we could tell there was a whole lot of issues with a lot of those things as well. So this may be the most important chart in our study, which just is very good proof that, outside of the towns, the broadband's terrible. Even in the towns, what we saw in the speed test were Charter's not fast everywhere. And so there are some neighborhoods where the speeds are considerably below 25.3. Are not 25.3, but they're just considerably slower than other parts. There are some parts of the communities where they're delivering speeds over 100 megabits to everybody. So that pointed out to us that their network in spots has some issues. That's not very unusual for cable companies, that some neighborhoods perform better than others. But our conclusion is not that Charter's perfect. They certainly have problems as well, but they're obviously heads and tails above everybody else. So, next slide. Again, average broadband speeds 6.2 for everybody else with the FCC definition. We did this study during the pandemic, obviously, and the pandemic highlighted another problem that we heard universally through the surveys, which is upload speeds. There were a lot of troubles connecting to schools. There were a lot of people had trouble connecting to work remotely. People had trouble maintaining video calls. A lot of people just couldn't even run cloud software from their house. People couldn't do voice over IP. There were just all sorts of problems with the quality, and those are all upload broadband issues. And so we heard a whole lot about that. A lot of people didn't describe it that way. What they described to us was the problems they were having. And we know that when they can't connect to Zoom well, that's an upload issue. And so we heard what they were telling us. A lot of them didn't realize that was an upload issue, but we also heard that everything bogs down in a tourist season. Next slide. This goes off to you, Dean. Dean, we're not hearing you. There he is.
And muted myself. Good evening, everyone. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the engineering side of things, but I'll preface it with, as we know, most things are buildable. It's really a function of cost, and Doug's going to get into more of that as we go down the line here. So I'm going to keep this pretty high level to move us along, and then we can address questions on deeper elements that people want to down the line. A couple of key things that we look at when we design a network, a broadband network today, is that we look at what are the largest investments, how long do they last, and the other thing that's probably more important is we're not looking at what's today, we're looking at what is coming up. And so, as Doug's already mentioned, we've seen a lot of things with work from home, content creation, And then even the evolution of the definition of broadband. In 2019, if you had 10.1, you were term and served. 2020, it's up to 25.3. And now in 2021 and 2022, NTIA and USDA, a couple of groups heavily involved in broadband, are looking at the definition of 120. So when we look at technology, there are a couple of things that could be used to solve these the broadband gap, if we want to call it that. And one of which was talked about was wireless. We looked at wireless for a bit, and we do a fair amount of wireless work ourselves. But in your area with the trees, the density, you're actually a fairly dense county in some places. The topology, the terrain, wireless really isn't the greatest solution. And if you look back at the previous tables, you'll notice that wireless had some of the lower speeds, especially on the upload speeds. And that's the battles they're fighting. It's a difficult hurdle to overcome without putting fiber just about everywhere to serve towers. And so once you get to that point, you just well run it the rest of the way. And so when we looked at this network, we basically concentrated on fiber because we saw that as the longest term solution with the best bandwidth. It's not inexpensive, and Doug will talk about that as we get a little farther down. But what it does is it creates a network that has a lifespan far beyond anything else that's out there today. In just general numbers, we divided the county up into areas, and then we looked and determined that we needed roughly 25 electronic sites to serve the county. And they're kind of scattered throughout the entire county, and they're connected together in a mesh network to provide some redundancy. And then in terms of the overall scope, if we were going to build the entire county with fiber, we'd be looking at approximately 1,500 to 1,600 miles of construction, serving just the rural areas. And we define those as the areas outside of the charter service areas. And then Washington Island, we're looking at about 1,100 miles. So when we look at what's the best way to build it, you're going to have people that have opinions one way or the other. And so, and they'll defend those to the bitter end. And so I took a different approach in that we designed the optical network to support two of the most popular technologies out there today. And that is with a passive optical splitter network or an active network, where the electronics at the central office, we'll call it, connects directly to electronics at the customer's premise, and there's nothing else in between. But the biggest investment you're going to make is in the fiber optic plant itself. It has the longest lifespan. It's 80% of the construction costs. And it's the part that disrupts most people the most, because you're out there digging in the front yards or putting new lines up across the poles in front of your place and so on. So we looked at how to maximize that investment. And so with that, we decided to use an architecture that's called a distributed architecture, where we have a data center or central office where the electronics are located in a core area. And then what we do is we run a feeder fiber out from that point to local convergence cabinets. And at that point, then it connects all the fibers from each individual house and aggregates them into a much smaller bundle that goes back to the core of the network. So in this particular case, like I said, this fiber architecture can be used in either a passive optical network, or it can be used in an active Ethernet connector network, where that cabinet is either a passive splitter or it's an actual Ethernet blade that has multiple ports, and each port is dedicated to a customer, as shown in the far end. And in either model, if you get growth in an area, we've allocated enough extra fiber in the feeder network to provide additional fiber to handle the high growth areas. So we're not designing this thing to be ultimate capacity across the entire county. We're designing it so that it can be expanded as the need grows. Key points we looked at was, like I said, active or passive. And as I said earlier, we've designed the model so that it's capable of supporting both. And actually, it will support both simultaneously. You can take a high volume customer and put them on a dedicated active connection. And then for the rest of the normal users, a passive network, especially the new ones now with 10 gig of capacity, will support a tremendous amount of bandwidth to individual users. In the case of Door County, it was compact enough in one respect that we would probably only put in one core network, be it in a new data center or an existing data center, and that would be used to aggregate all of the traffic before it was sent out to the outside world. Methodology, I'll go over this pretty briefly, but the red lines represent the 75 areas that we divided the county into. And we basically covered the entire county with the exception of the island just to the north of the peninsula, and we did cover Washington Island. One of the things we did is we actually drove through the island and we looked at the condition of the existing plant, and every one of those bright spots in the graphic on the left shows the places that we were at and looked at the existing conditions so that we could tailor the design and pricing models to fit what's actually out there. And the graphic on the right is just a blow up of one of the areas. And so we stopped at each one of those points and looked at what the existing infrastructure looked like and what we would have to do to place new infrastructure. This is just a summary table that just pulls everything together, and it shows each of the areas that we looked at. And then the final graph here that we're going to show is a couple of them that shows how the design was done. So in 10 of the 70 some areas, we took and we actually did a full design that basically took it down to the detail of taking fiber to every house. And so if we look at this area here, this is Liberty Grove up along the coast, or the shoreline in this case, and that white box is the area we'll move into next. And that's the detail showing how the fiber would need to run to get from the electronics node or local convergence cabinet out to every customer. And now we're back on the costs. And I think, Doug, we move back to you.
We move back to me. So all that work that Dean did turned into these giant numbers you see here. And so the whole point of the study was to figure out how much it would cost to build fiber and all the other electronics. And so as you can see here, we have costs for fiber, we have costs for drops. That's the connection from the street to get to every home and business. We have costs for electronics. That's both the electronics in those various cabinets and that Dean was talking about. It's also the electronics that go to every single customer's home or business. We also then there's huts, and that he was talking about having 25 of those scattered around the county. And it's not just the huts, but there's equipment inside those huts. And then there's operational assets. You know, an ISP to serve the whole county would be buying vehicles and operational software and computers and all the stuff it takes to run a workforce of people. So that's what operational assets are. So for the whole county, this is everybody, again, including Washington County, $130 million. Just for the rural areas, that's everywhere excluding charter, that's $76 million. You know, two very big numbers. There's the number of passings. A passing in our terminology is a home or a business that we could actually serve with fiber. And so, it doesn't include, the electric company serves other things like billboards, and, the electric companies have more customers than fiber companies do. And so these are actual people who could buy service. And then we just take the big number at the top and divide it down by the number of passings. For the whole county, it would cost about $4,700 for every passing to reach everybody, almost $6,000 just for the rural area. We knew as soon as we saw these numbers that we're going to need grants in the county, because in order to make this self-sufficient without grants, we need to see those numbers under $3,000. And it's not surprising. I think we knew this the second you hired us, once we looked at the map of the rural areas, that it was clear that the grants were going to be needed. Now, as Dean said, there's actually a surprising amount of density, even though it's a very large county and people are very spaced out. In the rural areas, people tend to live along various roads. And so, they're not quite as scattered out as you would see in true farming areas. I mean, we often have done studies in farming areas. We just did one in several different states, and those numbers are often, the cost for passing sometimes we see are $8,000, $10,000, $12,000, $15,000 per passing. And so the cost per passing is not dreadful, but it's high enough that you're going to need grants. And that also, those numbers also tell us why, somebody hasn't just run here out of their own money and build it, because those are pretty expensive numbers if you want to fund this whole network and try to make a profit at it without a subsidy. Just to talk about the numbers a bit, Dean didn't toot his own horn, but we were very conservative. We think these are very realistic numbers. It includes a 10% contingency for safety to make sure that we want to make sure that there's enough money in here. And so it could turn out that if you built this network tomorrow, that you wouldn't need quite all that money. But we've done hundreds of these studies, and we just really can't remember one where we underestimated. We try to be a little conservatively high. And as you could see by the detail of Dean's study, where he literally went down to every house in a lot of the county, we think these are very solid numbers. Next slide. And so there's a whole lot of financial analysis in the study. And so I did not put these big spreadsheets of revenues and expenses on, because that always puts everybody to sleep. And so what really matters in this county is how much grant do I need to make these work? That's what really matters. And it turns out that the amount of grants I need are going to be dependent on how many customers sign up for the business. And so if only 45% of the people would sign up for fiber, then we need almost $41 million of grants just for the ISP to break even. And that means they would actually want a couple million more of grant than that, because nobody's going to spend this many millions on a business and just barely break even. As those percentages go up, if an ISP is able to get 50 and 55 and 60 and 65% of customers, the amount of grant goes down. Again, these are just for the rural area. So, if we get enough customers, we're only looking at maybe needing $12 million of grant. What matters is that last column, because the current grants, which we're going to talk about here in a few slides, but the current grants that are being offered at the federal level are up to 75% financing, which means we only need to come up with grants that are, and you can see that's just way more than these numbers. And so the grants available should definitely make it doable to get this done in the county. So that, that's the really good news. Next slide. Again, this is the numbers for building the whole county, and the amount of grants we need is not as high, because it turns out that in some of the towns, you can actually build fiber without a subsidy. The density is high enough that the cost per passing is low enough that they actually could be profitable just building them straight out. And so that if you build the whole county, you actually would need less grants than if you just build the rural area. But to do that, somebody would have to literally tackle the whole thing. And so, but that's an interesting way to remind us that there are parts of the county where you could build a profitable ISP. So, and of course, the trade-off there is in the towns where you're competing against Charter, you're not likely to get as high of a number of customers. In the rural areas, in other counties, we see where broadband is as bad as yours. It's not unusual for ISPs to be thinking about getting 65, 75, and even 80% of the customers, because the broadband is bad for everybody. And so the nationwide broadband penetration rate is around 87% of all homes. And so you're never going to get everybody, because some people will stick with their cell phones or whatever. But the possibility is high in the rural areas to get some pretty significant penetration rates. Next slide. One of the things we looked at was seasonality. That's obviously a very giant issue here. And we've worked with a lot of seasonal communities. And so it boils down to be a philosophy issue. The question you have to ask yourself if you build a countywide or rural fiber network is, who am I building it for? And a lot of communities would come down and say, I'm building it for the people who live here all the time, because that's the ones in the long run who are going to have to pay for it. And so a lot of communities actually come up to that same conclusion. And so they don't give price breaks to seasonal customers. They go, look, if you want our broadband in your rental house, you got to buy it all year, just like we have to buy it all year. If you decided that you wanted to give discounts, like give them half the year off, then that adds another $6 million to the need for grants. And so there's a real cost for giving discounts to seasonal people. And there's no right or wrong answer there. It's simply one of those things that whoever the final ISP is going to have to decide how they want to do that. Certainly when you give people months where they don't have to pay, that's less revenue, and that makes everyone else have to pay a little more to make up for it. So it's just there's no right or wrong answer there. I mean, you're as seasonal as they come. I mean, there's very few communities around that have more people, a bigger percentage of the people who are from outside the county during the peak of the tourist season. So that's just one of those answers that somebody will have to wrestle with once they get the money to build this thing. Next slide. There are other key financial. I mean, I showed you the penetration rates changing, and by far that's the one that matters the most. So, penetration rates really change the answer. If you can remember back to how much that changed the grants that were needed. But interest rates are important. Loan terms, meaning the number of years that I can borrow the money for. Fiber networks, it's not unusual to be able to borrow for 20, 25, or even 30 years. As Dean said, these are very long-term assets. The kind of banks who loan to these projects are used to making loans of that length. Prices matter a lot too. And so the study we did assumed that broadband starts at $60, and $60 would be for a symmetrical. We didn't have, we're not setting the speed, but maybe it's a symmetrical 100 megabit or symmetrical 200 megabit, whatever the ISP decides the basic product is. And then, prices go up from there. But, compared to what people pay today in the county, from what we could see from all the people that had broadband, the average price being paid today is around $72, $73. So $60 is a pretty competitive rate. So next slide. And the cost of the network is important. It turns out it's least important of all those other factors. As long as we know ahead of time what it's going to cost with Dean's numbers, I can borrow enough money to cover that. So that really is not, even though it's the big number, it doesn't, changing that by $1 million doesn't change the bottom line very much. Next slide. So all along, I talked about grant financing. Right now, the way I'm talking to clients is it's raining grants. For years and years and years, we struggled to try to get $1 million here and $1 million there in grants. And all of a sudden, the federal government has just come up with huge amounts of grants. The states come up with large amounts of grants. The largest grant will be coming somewhere around the end of the year, and it's $45 billion, it's $42.5 billion for broadband. And there's also some additional, there's $2 billion extra for reconnect. So it all adds up to $45 billion. That's a huge amount of money. The state will probably get in the range of $1 billion. And these grants are actually, even though it's a federal grant, the money is going to be given to the states to figure out who the winners are. And so that's going to be coming down. The state also has their own grant program, which they funded pretty heavily in the last year. So that they funded $189 million coming in broadband grants this year so that's in addition to the federal grant. There's also, I guess I said, 2 or 3 other grant programs that have been funded. So there's just a whole lot of potential to get grants here. And because of that, though, this is probably a once in a lifetime opportunity. If you don't find the money in this coming grant round, it could be many years till there's big grants again. I think the federal government's kind of assuming that this is going to do it. If the state of Wisconsin gets $1 billion and we add another, 3 or 4 million, 100 million from all these other sources for the state, that's all going to cover a lot of rural places. There's certainly enough money in that kind of grant structure to get Door County done. So Grant County done, that's a funny way to say it, isn't it? So, there are also other grants. There's a grants to do electric smart grid. There's grants for schools and libraries. Some of the school money can be used to build fiber. There's just all sorts of other grants that are not part of those big ones that are also floating around now. And one of the key words that we have used in our recommendations to you is collaboration, because the best way to get this funded is to bring all of those sources together. $1 million here, 10 million there. Let's add all these grants together and get this thing built. That's what we see other counties doing. And the interesting thing is the federal grants, clearly say they favor public-private partnerships and they favor collaborations. They want to see you come in with a grant that the entire community is behind. That's what they're looking for, because they want these grants to work. They don't want, you know, there were grants in 2009, if you remember, it was called the stimulus program at the time. And some of those grants fell flat on their face and failed. You know, they want these to work. So they really want these strong community efforts where when the community's behind it and everybody buys the broadband, they know that it's going to work. So collaboration is going to be a big key to getting this money. Next slide. So next step, and now, of course, this was delivered months ago. The county is, and all the folks in the county have already started down these paths. So there's already been a whole bunch of meetings of communities and stakeholders to talk about doing some of these things. So again, get the collaborative effort going. You know, we don't need one ISP to serve the whole county, but what you want to do is make sure that somebody serves every part of the county. If it takes 2 or 3 ISPs to get that done, so be it. You know, what matters is that people get good broadband. So you know, there may or may not be one ISP willing to step up and do the whole thing. Part of what we reckon right now, which is the bottom bullet, is it's time to reach out to ISPs now and let's find out who's interested in investing in the county. And so I've sent a few names up to the county folks. There's a whole lot of ISPs in the region who are probably interested. The thing that we have to caution you about is when we have that $45 billion in grant money, if you don't get a local solution, somebody else is going to come and serve it, and you may not like who that is. You know, all the big companies, AT&T, Frontier, CenturyLink, have all said that they're going to chase a lot of grant money. And most people around the country don't want them to be the one to come in and do this, because they're sort of the ones that caused the rural area to be bad in the first place. And they, you know, everyone fears, because they got an 11 billion grant program about 7 years ago. And an awful lot of the places they didn't even build anything. And so the fear is if they win it, that people are not going to get the solution they want. Now they may come in and do a bang up job too, but I think most communities, and I know that your folks have had this discussion, want a local solution, because local solutions in the long run are always the best solutions. The ISPs are they live here, they work here. You know, it's not some big company from around somewhere else in the country. So there's also, you know, you need to identify staffing resources. I believe that they've already, I don't know if they found a position or not, but they're looking for a person to head up this grant effort. Next slide. You know, again, get creative seeking grants. One big grant could do it all, but it might just, you know, it's going to take some other stuff. There's also, again, electric smart grid grants, middle mile grants. There's all sorts of grants we can put together to make this work. At some point, and the surveys were so positive that this may not be necessary, but you know, sometimes before somebody spends this kind of size $1 million, you want to do a statistically valid survey. The surveys we did are really good at measuring sentiment, because first off, we got a lot of responses. I mean, the folks in this county really stepped up and responded to the survey. But that survey, because it's not statistically valid, is not really pinning down exactly how many people are probably really going to buy fiber if you build it. And so if somebody wants to do that, they have to do some statistically valid surveys. You can't really do one survey for the whole county that would work, because your county is really a bunch of different counties. There's a bunch of different neighborhoods. Even in the rural areas, there's more than one sort of area that have different characteristics. And so, you know, I'm envisioning different parts of the county might get together and decide to do this. Or one of the ISPs, if they decide to do this very well, they would just go and get this done on their own. So the alternative is what's called a canvas. You know, put up sign up sheets and really just start getting everybody to sign up to say that if somebody builds it, you'll buy it. You know, that's in some ways that's better than a survey, is to get everybody starting to commit to buy it if somebody builds it. So we're going to have to challenge the FCC maps. If you remember the speed test, it showed almost everybody had speeds below 25.3. In the county, a lot of the ISPs, those 3 telcos, are actually reporting speeds faster than that. And that's a problem, because in the past, that has actually kept grant money from coming to the county. There were several rounds of grants the last couple of years where none of that money came to the county because the ISPs claimed that your speeds are too fast and that everybody has good broadband. The FCC believes the county has good broadband. This study shows you don't have good broadband. I mean, outside of the towns, nobody has 25.3, or at least not enough people to count. The averages are way, way below 25.3. There are customers, if you live right next to a DSL cabinet, you can have that speed. But if you're even, half a mile away, you're not going to have that speed. And that's what we know. We found speeds that are just generally very slow. But, there might have to be some challenge there. The good news is the $45 billion grant has already made it clear that they're going to believe communities over the ISPs, but there's still going to be that challenge to deal with. So next slide. We're recommending that everyone review their local policies. You've got all sorts of local policies related to construction, permitting, rights of ways, all sorts of, inspections and how people locate existing buried fiber. And those policies have grown up over the years. The first thing that alerted me was I heard there was a whole lot of people in the county who fight against new towers. And that generally tells me that there's probably other policies in place that are going to make it harder to build fiber. So we're recommending between now and when these grants are done that everybody take a look at those policies. If there's anything that's really going to be a hindrance in there, you need to relax them. Knowing that once you relax them, it doesn't just apply to this project, it would apply to all the other utilities. But you don't want to make it hard for somebody to bring you the solution. That's important. Tonight is one of the steps of educating the public. It's for one thing, if the public in this county was very aware that they had bad broadband. So that I don't think we have to educate anybody on that. Everybody knew it, but certainly get everybody on board to help work towards a solution. Lobby for more state broadband grants. There's more money they could put in. There's also tackle other broadband grants. I didn't even mention in the grants, but there's a lot of money for other things. There's money to get computers in houses that don't have them. There's a whole lot of money for computer and literacy training. There's a lot of people who really aren't comfortable using the internet and they're not comfortable using a computer. There's money that will 100% pay for setting up training courses in the county. That's something that's going to have to be tackled by schools, universities, or nonprofits. That's not typically something the government is probably not going to go and set up training classes, but there's a whole lot of parties in the state that should need to be made aware that there's a huge amount. There's several $1 billion just for that effort. And so, we need to make sure that somebody does that, because the more people that get computers in their house and the more people that learn how to use computers, the better the broadband business will do and the better the community will do. Most of the people that don't have, a lot of people that don't have computers because they don't know how to use them would like to. Every time in a community who does one of these training courses, we see they get flooded with people who want to learn. Next slide. And I think that was about it, isn't it? Yep. There's who we are. So I think that if you want to contact us, though, I think actually we're hoping that people do that through Steve or somebody, but we've been answering a ton of questions already. And I guess we're going to open the floor up to start getting questions from the people who watched this presentation, which has now grown to 42.
Thank you. Okay, so what we'd like to do is obviously open it up for questions or comments. What I will do is I'll help facilitate it and just make sure that everyone either can hear the question or at least understand what the context is. So again, there's a number of ways to get involved. We have a few in the audience. If you have any questions, you can just, I'll give you the mic and you can ask a question. For those that are online, you can actually submit a question through the system itself. On the bottom of the screen, you'll see question and you can type in a question and we can hang out that way. Or if you're online, we can also have you raise your hand. And then what I can do is I will allow you to talk and ask a question. So what I will do is I'll first start in the room. Is there anyone in the room that has a question they'd like to ask? If you think of something, you come back. Yes, go ahead, sir. Yes.
Thank you for doing the study. It's very informative, but it seems like it's a dead end. Where do we go from here? It sounds like you have to put together, maybe the 5 of us here could put together an LLC to become an ISP and write all these grants. Other than that, I don't see any other way that you're going to be able to build out this system. I think it's a great idea.
Were you able to hear the question at all? Just make sure the sound picks up.
Yeah, I heard the question. There are ISPs absolutely willing to come and serve the county. So you have some ISPs there who are going to be interested in these grants already. I mean, you have several ISPs in the county who are interested. I've been contacted by two outside parties who I happen to actually know who said they're interested. I think you're going to find that there's quite a few people who are already in the business who are going to be interested in doing this. So.
What's the next step forward? I mean, I moved up here in 2015. We were within just about 400 feet of charter, and we never ever got them to put in anything. You know, just it was a real frustration.
Well, the next steps are pretty straightforward. Partner with one, two, or three of these ISPs, and obviously you don't want them to all ask to serve the same areas. They go after the grants with the county support. I mean, the ISPs are actually the one to go after these big grants. Once they win the grants, they come and they build the fiber. I mean, it's the path forward it's complicated, but it's also somewhat straightforward. It's, you know, this only makes sense because all this grant money's out there. 2 years ago, my answer would have been very different than that. So 2 years ago, we would have had a very big challenge, but right now, the money is there to do it if we can get an ISP who's willing to do it. So.
Okay. One of the questions, let's make sure everyone has it, is doesn't the Infrastructure Act money require the state to do comprehensive planning in order to get access to the federal money? What are we hearing from the Wisconsin state government in terms of their plans to do so?
Yeah, the state of Wisconsin was actually already ahead of the ball game. They've had a statewide broadband map that they've been creating for years. They've been gathering speed tests. What they've got to do to get their piece of the 45 billion is they have to file a grant plan because the state's actually going to be the one doing the grants. And so because they already had a state grant program, I'm sure they're going to make it look very much like that one. And so, you know, that's the comprehensive plan is they need a plan for how they're going to distribute this money. Those plans are due by May, I believe. And so I'm sure they're very actively working on it. But again, you're one of a dozen states who already had a very active state grant program. So I haven't talked to them directly, but I'm pretty sure they're probably very much on top of this. So.
Okay, thank you. Next question. I'm told historically that the county was against lines running on poles. Is that true? And has the county eliminated that obstacle? I believe I guess I'll county that just from the county perspective. I think the original issue when broadband was, I guess, starting to take shape was the broadband and the towers related to that. It wasn't directly related to, I guess, running the lines on the poles. In terms of the obstacles, I think I'm going to defer that to Dean on that portion, but there's the ability to run the fiber on the poles, but there's also space issues. And I know that was discovered once before. I don't know if you guys want to just cover that once again in terms of some of the logistics that we'll have to work through for that.
Sure, I can pick that up. Door County is unique in its beauty and its shape, but all of those create challenges. And probably the largest challenge is you have a lot of hard rock. And so as a result, to bury a fiber optic network in mass throughout the entire county would be prohibitively expensive. So really the only practical alternative is to go back and go onto the power lines. It really is your most cost-effective solution, regardless of even if there is a fair amount of work to make that happen. And at this point, I think what you're going to see what's happening here is the amount of facilities that are put up for a fiber optic network are minuscule compared to what you've seen up there for cable TV and copper networks that typically have much larger cables. I think it's just the reality what it's going to be in that county in your county for most of the areas. There will be some areas that are buried today that we have planned to be buried also in the new build.
Yeah, and just to expand on that again, if you look at the poles today, there's 2-3-inch big fat cables for the cable company and telephone company and the power company. Fiber cables are little tiny things. I mean, they're not even a half an inch across. They're tiny little thin cables. So there's definitely, you will have to change some poles. You'll have to move some wires around to make them fit, but that's included in Dean's cost estimate. So we took that into consideration.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, there seems to be a lot of research focus on the current economic impact of lousy internet connection. But how about the future of economic growth? It would seem that Door County would be a great place for internet software focused companies would want to start up or relocate to. Those green businesses would be a great opportunity for Door County.
Well, again, now we're just getting my opinion, but the biggest benefit that I believe your county is going to see two big benefits from fiber. One is, it's going to really renew the tourism industry because, a lot of the innkeepers told us that they were not getting visitors who returning who care about broadband. And that's becoming more and more of an issue. But from economic development, other than that, the biggest benefit that we're seeing is the people working from home. It's a brand new phenomenon. It doesn't look like it's probably going to go away. And, and the county can and historically could have tried to attract a business that brought 100 new employees in. But if you build fiber, you're going to probably bring in hundreds and hundreds of good paying jobs. And those kind of jobs can really transform a community. And a lot of those people that work at home eventually end up starting, brick and mortar businesses. And so that, that's sort of where economic development is coming from these days. People start in their garages, they start in their houses, and they do it. So my family just happens to have one of the classic stories of that because I think my sister is probably the pioneer of working at home. She was the voice over IP director for Citicorp nationwide and has worked out of her home in West Virginia for 20 years. So which was pretty amazing. So that's the kind of jobs that you get in the county, and so you are a beautiful place to live. People want to live there, but they have to have broadband to do it. So.
Sure. This one was a comment. Please put your contact information on the access that to a website that we have established. So we'll be doing that. Maybe the next question is off the chat. Maybe Steve, this might be for yours because I know you attended some sessions already. But what criteria does the state use in determining which counties win the grant access and what obstacles does Door County face?
Well, it seems to change every round, but there's two very consistent criteria that put you ahead of everyone else. One is an intense collaborative effort across your community, whatever that community may be, that is applying for assistance. The other is they expect to see a fairly substantial local match to go against the grant request. They also want to see a well thought out system, and I think that this study is one of those important ingredients where we can show how far we're ahead. In fact, in the northeast part of Wisconsin, we're light years ahead of everyone else who is just now starting to get into this issue and try to develop strategies for moving forward. So those three things, I think, bode well for Door County as we pursue grant assistance from a variety of sources, whether it be federal or state.
Steve, this is Dean. If I could tag on to that, one of the other things that I think is a bit of an advantage for Door County is that there has been very little grant or federal award money for broadband in the county to date so far. So it leaves a large block open that you guys fit into.
Yeah, absolutely true.
All right, thank you. A question from the audience here?
Yes, as ISP people are selected, I would think that the denser populations may be, or there would be a tendency to serve them sooner as the return would come in to be able to continue building. Is there any way that we can ensure uniform installation even in the very small populated areas, so that a small community will get service
equally to a larger service area?
It's an interesting answer to your question, sir. The grants actually level the playing field. The grants are large enough that they actually financially might make the rural areas more attractive to build than the cities. And so, that kind of changes everything. In the past, when it was strictly pay for it out of your pocket, there was no question. That's why charter's in the town, and that's why they're not in the rural areas. But the grants level the playing field. And in fact, the grants, you could end up in a situation where all the rural areas get built, but all the towns don't. Because the other advantage of the rural areas from an ISP perspective is almost everybody's going to sign up. But in the towns, the ISPs have to compete against charter. There's already some towns that I've here that are already talking to ISPs. And so you're going to certainly see some towns get it. But the chances are that if you bring an ISP in because they're interested in the grant money, they're probably going to go after all of the rural area. There's no guarantee. That's the whole point of the next 4 or 5 months is to get these ISPs lined up. But my expectation is they're going to do everything. As Dean said, your county is unlucky that you don't have broadband, but you're lucky that the rural area is one giant contiguous block. That's actually something that's very attractive to build to. And so, again, no guarantees, but I think you're going to get folks interested in coming to every single home. So,
Ken, can I add something to that? We do know that one ISP has already been selected for one of the communities, and they're in the process of trying to string other communities into a more comprehensive solution. So things are moving forward on the community level very quickly.
And Steve, if I could add to that also, one of the things that we've started to see is that the towns are looking at a holistic approach of serving everyone rather than just parts of the town. So, I see some positive signs with that where they're saying to the ISP, look, if you want to serve the denser areas, you also have to serve the rest. And that philosophy needs to be followed. One minor caveat that I would add, though, is that in any build, you have to start someplace. And invariably, just based on the concepts of the design, the electronics and the other pieces that serve a larger number of people tend to be located near the areas of population. And at that point, you then have to build out to reach the fringes. We don't put that out on the fringes because it's not economically viable or the least cost solution. So there is going to be a bit of a delay from first to last, but unlike 600 yards away and never, it's going to be 600 yards away and next spring.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, the expectation is that with 1,600 miles of fiber, it's going to take 3 or 4 years to build everybody. I mean, that's a lot of construction, and you don't do the construction there in the dead of winter, and so that's 4 construction seasons. It could be 3, could be condensed down to 3, but by the time that's over, it's to everybody. So this is not a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan. It's a get it done plan. So.
Okay, I have one more question from the audience.
Yeah, just a clarification. By definition of broadband, a speed of 25/3 is charter spectrum in the city of Sturgeon Bay and other areas, they're not considered broadband?
They are. Back to that speed test chart, on average, they're delivering 67 megabits down, and I forget the up number, but it was like 7 or something. So the answer is yes, they are considered as broadband. So, and all that means is it's probably going to be very hard to get grant money for those towns, but it's still economically feasible to build them. So, because of the density, so they are considered as broadband.
Well, I was talking the city of Sturgeon Bay. The whole city is wired and has internet. So,
yep.
In other areas, like they have internet with spectrum.
But as the gentleman said, if you live 300 feet past where the cable stops, you're out of luck. So it stops where it stops, right?
So there's a couple of things I'd like to add to that, if I may. And Dean, I'm going to ask you to kind of give a technical description of the difference between what is classified as cable and what is fiber, because I think there is some differences and it's good to know what those are. But I think one of the things that we also saw from the survey, those people that had Charter Spectrum were very clearly saying, we want a choice. We want a competitive choice to pick from.
Okay. For a brief technical description of the difference between cable for a cable TV system and fiber, one of the biggest ways to think about it is that a cable TV system is based on a copper conductor in a insulator surrounded by a shield, and any signal transiting a copper cable has a physical capacity issue that as the frequency gets higher, in other words, more bandwidth, the distance gets shorter. So as these cable TV companies pushed their channel lineups higher and offered more broadband, their distances that they could reach decreased, and so they had to rework their network and continually do so. Within fiber optics, however, Door County isn't large enough to see that kind of degradation in service over distance. Not only that, the amount of speed that can be pushed over a fiber is in the terabit range, whereas in coaxial cable, they're into the 100 gigabit range, and that's going to be about the max. And then the final thing is that copper coaxial cable deteriorates over time. Fiber's deterioration is almost minimal over time. We've had stuff that's been running for 40 plus years with no degradation in service. It provides the same level, if not as it was originally. So I think those are probably the two biggest things.
Well, and I want to add one more because that's someone had mentioned earlier about the future of broadband, because Dean said we want to build for the future. Remember that just 5 years ago, the national definition of broadband was 10.1. Now it's 25.3. This year it's moving to 120. And the reason for that is the amount of bandwidth that we all use has been doubling about every 3 years. And it's been doing that since 1980. And so when you look out 5 and 10 years from now, people are going to be using, if you go out 10 years from now with that growth curve, people are going to be using 100 times more bandwidth. And so then as a collective county, everyone together. And that curve has never stopped since 1980. The beauty of the fiber is right now, the technology that Dean has designed there can deliver 10 gigabits to every customer. That's 100 times faster than what Charter's starting product is at 100 megabits. I mean, that's how much faster it is on day one. So the capability is there. And over time, they're already looking at 25 and 40 gigabit fiber to the home. And so that technology will get faster and faster. The cable network is not likely to ever come close to catching up to that. So it's simply, we say it's future-proofed, but the reason for that is you change electronics card in one of those huts and the speeds are higher. So, I mean, it's a really pretty inexpensive, easy way to make things work faster. So.
Yeah, and I would say one final point with that would be is the biggest thing that cable TV companies are experiencing is that they're starting to push some of the downstream speeds up fairly high. Like I said, they're looking at gigabit services now where they couldn't have even 4 years ago. The issue that they will always struggle with is the return speed. In other words, the upload speed. That is starting to reach its caps, and we do not see it going much higher. Whereas with fiber, we can make that speed symmetrical. You're willing to buy the service, they can put as much upstream speed as you want to pay for.
Yeah, last point, because that's a good question. A lot of the Charter customers said they had problems with their school kids working from home. I mean, Charter does not have a great upload speed. In many houses, if you have one kid, it's fine. If you were trying to have 3 kids do their schoolwork, it really wasn't adequate. So, and add into that, adults working at the same time. And so, there are some definite issues for that technology. So.
Okay, we have a number of questions in the queue, so we're going to try to see if we can keep this pace here. So one question, I think I'll defer to Steve because you already partially answered that question, but who are the ISPs companies that are referred to that have expressed interest in taking on the challenges? And what other ISP companies would you suggest as an examples to approach?
Well, one of the things that we went into this study with an understanding, and we communicated that certainly to Dean and Doug, is our first priority as we move into the implementation of a system is use local where possible. If it's not available local, then at least regionally, because we want a system and we want providers that are accountable to their customers and their neighbors, and they tend to be a little more responsive to the needs of the customer rather than someone that's based in Chicago or New York. So the ISP I mentioned a moment ago, the negotiations are just wrapping up, so I'm not at liberty to disclose who that is. I will say that it's someone I think everyone would be very happy with, and has a substantial amount of investment already in the county. I think there are others that are looking at the possibility of being an ISP. I can't speak for them, and so I'd rather not do that. Doug has sent a couple of possible ISPs that have shown some interest, and we'll put those in the mix also. I like those. Now, they're not local, they're not regional, but they have a lot of experience, and so I think that has to be taken into consideration.
Okay, I'm just going to knock two out quick in terms of comments. One comment was just tongue in cheek, but I don't know anyone who gets a break on their garbage fees via the taxing authority if they're a seasonal resident. I'm assuming that's a comment in regards to seasonal service for broadband. Just another comment in terms of the federal infrastructure legislation. Wisconsin must have a plan to serve every unserved location in the state as defined by the 25-3. This will not be a competitive grant program such as the state has managed in the past. What is important for Door County is to understand that there's underserved locations and encourage the ISPs to make known to the state that they are interested in being built there. That's just a general comment. I just want to make that part of the record. One question, we're in the town of Neswapi and I have to drive 10 minutes to get my cell phone to work. Will this get to me? Question mark. And maybe I'll put that back to the panelists. I know there's been a couple of questions in terms of timeline and what's realistic for those listening online right now, when they could actually start to see and have the potential. And I guess this is fair to put is, what are some realistic expectations that people might want to put in their minds?
Again, we have to wait for the timeline for the big grant program, but the expectations are that that will probably start paying the first money out sometime next year. And from there, it's probably a 3 or 4 year build out to reach everybody. And so, that once the grants are awarded, it's, those grant programs actually want you to get done quickly. So that they're not going to give you forever to build them. One of the side benefits is once there is fiber everywhere, it's very much easier for the cellular companies to also improve the cellular coverage because they don't have to build fiber now to put another cell site around. And so we've already seen the counties who do have a lot of fiber also get improved cell coverage. We did hear a lot of people who have terrible cell coverage. I mean, there's a whole lot of that going on in the county. So one would hope that would get better as well. So.
And I would say that Wi-Fi in the house will augment just about every cellular plan today. And so just even having Wi-Fi in your house with a good broadband connection will improve your in-house cellular.
Ken, I'll also say in response to the question, there are conversations taking place with the town right now who is showing an interest in fiber and maybe combining it with surrounding areas. And we have passed that on to ISPs for consideration, but there is an interest in developing a project in that area.
Okay, there are two questions in regards to next steps and also organizational structure, which is actually one of the things that Steve and I will cover just in a minute. I guess I'd like to ask one more time, is there any other questions from the audience or those online for, I guess, what I consider our experts, panelists, in terms of the study itself? If not, we'll transition to the next part of the meeting, but I'll first open up one last time for any other questions. Going once. Oh, sorry, sir.
With regards to the competition and the ISPs, I'd like to hear your thoughts about both Cellcom, which I think Cellcom has already put fiber to their towers, and also SpaceX.
Yeah, I'm imagining, I mean, we know the Cellcom folks. I'm imagining that they're going to be one of the people interested in doing this. So they do have a lot of fiber already in the county. SpaceX is not a great solution for everybody for several reasons. One is that it doesn't work well with trees. And so for an awful lot of houses, and I happen to live in a town with trees myself. So, you know, some of my friends have tried it and it doesn't like trees around your house very well at all. It also doesn't do well where there's too many people in a close area. It's really made for farms in North Dakota. It's a wonderful technology. I actually love the technology, but it's really not very well suited to Door County because of the trees. It's very poorly suited to where I live in Appalachia. Now, it's going to work for some customers if you have a good sign of the sky. We actually, during a study, we actually ran into a few folks in Door County who already are trying it. So there are some folks on it. And so it's a good technology, but it's not going to work for everybody. And so, you know, it's not the solution, but it's a good solution. So.
Is there a need for additional towers, and how many would it take countywide to bring the level of service that you speak of with fiber optics?
There's no towers needed for fiber optics. No, fiber optics just goes on the poles and in the ground. So there's no extra towers needed to get the broadband to everybody. There might be, if the cell companies wanted to expand cell coverage, they might want a few more towers. But if fiber's everywhere, they can actually do that with what's called small cell sites and maybe not build any more towers. You know, so that's really up to the cell companies. But there's no new towers needed for this solution.
But either that or the towers may be much shorter.
Much shorter, yeah. So.
Okay, is there any other questions that would be made for both Dean or Doug? Again, they're not going to drop off, but we're just going to transition then to the next part. All right, so why don't we do that? So what we'd like to do is just maybe just discuss. So we did have a question in terms of what are our, I guess, next steps. And then also too, what are we looking at in terms of our organizational structure going forward, and who would that be and how we're going to accomplish that? So we'd like to maybe cover that with you quickly. So just two things I'd like to do. I'm just going to move the screen here really quick just for logistics. So
yeah, we can see that it's showing up good. So
yeah, okay. So the first thing we like to do is there's been some questions in terms of communication and how do you learn more, or how do we find items in terms of this presentation, or who would you find in terms of contacts? So through this project, the Door County Economic Development Corporation has set up a website, and you can see on the screen, it's the FiberNet of Door County. This site is up and running, and we actually have we did a presentation about 2 weeks ago. That's already been posted. This presentation will also be posted on the site, but it does have information in terms of the report itself, also items in terms of other resources. And as we continue with this project, you'll see more and more resources being added to this website. So I guess we encourage both residents and communities to, I guess, refer or bookmark this site in terms of, I guess, a resource going forward in the future. In terms of, I guess, what I would consider just some of the logistics or how we are planning to move forward in terms of coordination and efforts. Obviously, as we've heard from our experts, there is plenty of work to be done, both in terms of working with ISPs, power companies, our communities, funding, grants. So there's plenty of work to go around. So when this study was completed, We worked with the Economic Development Corporation and other key stakeholders as in terms of a committee. We identified some of those. You'll see, I guess, from the shared screen of who those are. Everything from the county government to the towns, school districts, the Economic Development Corporation, even the schools and hospitals, our healthcare facilities are all part of, I guess, what we can consider, key stakeholders in terms of moving forward. And what we have done is we've put together, I guess, what are some of those roles, but also some action steps over the next 90 days that we hope to have a lot of these areas start working on so we can start getting some momentum. I think the two key areas that we've identified, and Steve, you can also provide some more information as well, but two key areas that we identified is one is at the county level. So at the county level, we're trying to move forward with hiring a coordinator. It's going to be a broadband coordinator that serve on behalf of the entire county. We're hoping to bring that forward to the county board this month. And we're hoping to use the ARA funds, the federal funds that were allocated to the county to help fund that position. But then also at the local level, as we've discussed, a lot of these efforts will be taking place at the local level. We're asking that each township or community actually establish a broadband committee or assign that function to an existing committee. And then that way we'll be able to start coordinating and working through both the educational materials and information for that. So those are two key steps that we're taking immediately in terms of trying to get, I guess, more educational out, but also trying to get ourselves in place for moving forward with some of these discussions with the ISPs and other project efforts. So I don't know, Steve, if you wanted to add a little bit more to that or any other detail that I missed on that.
No, I think that's a good overview. This particular coordinator is going to be key, I think, to moving the recommendations forward and basically, as the old saying goes, herding the cats to make sure we're all in the same lane, going the same direction.
So again, going back to those questions, I guess that's what we're doing in terms of our next steps in terms of now. It also gives you a little bit of an idea of how we're trying to, I guess, move this forward. So again, it's going to be, I guess, all hands on deck. Again, the county will be hiring a position in terms of trying to help do the coordination. As part of the overall oversight, we'll be forming a committee made up of, I guess, what we consider stakeholders and experts that'll help guide that process. That'll also be developed in terms at the county level. But again, there'll be a number of areas that we'll all have responsibility, both at the local level, the county, and also at the Economic Development Corporation in terms of trying to move this project forward. So again, there's a lot of exciting things to happen. I know we're all anxious to see it happen even faster. But again, I think we have this in place and a good plan moving forward. And a lot of that work's been accomplished through the work that's been presented tonight by Dean and also Doug in terms of their work. So with that, I'll open it up to any last questions or comments. First of the panelists, any last questions or comments from our panelists?
None for me. I appreciate everyone's time here. These were some great questions we got tonight, so thank you.
And I would echo that. We appreciate the opportunity to assist Door County in this endeavor.
Thank you. Steve?
Let's get to work. I mean, this has been talked about for a long time, and now we have the roadmap, and it's up to us to make sure that we get this done and it increases our livability in our community.
Excellent. With that, I'll ask one more time. Is there any other last questions? Yes, sir, in the audience.
This coordinator that will be hired by the county, who will that individual report to? Is there a specific department that will become?
Right now, what's being proposed actually would report to the administrator, which would be myself. So we're trying to give it, I guess, as much exposure and authority as possible to move this project forward. But again, we'll also have a committee that's made up of, again, experts that'll help guide it forward. We have a good model that many people will not be familiar with, but we actually have a committee that exists right now that helps guide our communications network for emergencies, our emergency response system that's in place. And then we're trying to model it after that. That's been very successful, but that's what we're hoping to do. So the position will be housed within the county, reports to the administrator, but as oversight of both the county board, but also a outside committee of experts from the county. Yes, sir.
Yeah, is there somebody already at the county that deals with the existing ISPs?
The question is there anyone at the county that does the existing ISPs? I guess between the existing ISPs, it'd be myself and our technical services. But I'd also say that have a strong partnership with DC EDC. So we're both, I guess, in communications with Steve Jenkins, our panelist here tonight, Door County Economic Development Corporation. They've been largely involved in working with the existing ISPs and trying to build those partnerships already.
Are they part of the county government?
DC EDC is a separate nonprofit corporation that's responsible for economic development in the county, but where you have a strong partnership with them. So DC EDC represents the entire county for items related to economic growth for the county itself. And broadband obviously plays a large role in our future economic growth. Any other questions for the good of the night? If not, we'll call the meeting and we'll conclude it. We thank all those for attending. We thank our panelists and we appreciate all your input. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.